Welcome to the Young Wealth Show, where you'll truly learn how to make, spend, and invest money for an awesome life. Get the real life stuff that wasn't part of your school curriculum. Young Wealth gives you innovative new ways of dealing with your finances, as well as the skills and tools you're going to need to survive and be successful out on your own. Let the Young Wealth Show be your GPS to take you from clueless to clued in. Here's your host, Jason Hartman, with Young Wealth.
Good day and welcome to the Young Wealth Show. This is your host, Jason Hartman, and this is show number 5. Today we're going to talk to the author of Rich by 30. Does that sound like a good goal to have? Well, it definitely is, because money is not just about money. It's about freedom. In fact, you almost ought to call it freedom, because when you have money, it doesn't make life perfect. It doesn't solve all your problems. It does solve a few of them, that's for sure, and it does create, or it can create, I should say. It doesn't necessarily create some good freedom for you, so you can enjoy the world and do what you like to do and do what you want to do. Here's the interview with Lesley, who's the author of Rich by 30. When she was just 17, she was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and she's made quite a name for herself with her book Rich by 30. Here's the interview. Check it out. We'll see you next time. It's my pleasure to have on the show Lesley Scorgie. She is the author of Rich by 30, A Young Adult's Guide to Financial Success. Lesley, it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thanks for having me.
This is just fantastic that you're out talking to young people about how they can be financially successful and really sharing with them some of the sort of seemingly obvious and fundamental education that they just don't really get in school. And it amazes me that this is not really taught in school. What was the inspiration for the book, just quickly, and what are your thoughts on why this is just not taught in our school systems?
Those are great observations. What I have found was that when I was growing up and took an interest in money, by the way, I'm only 25 years old right now.
25 years young.
25 years young. When I was starting to learn about money at the age of 10, 11, 12, and throughout the years, there were not many resources available for young people to learn about money. And the reason I had taken an interest in money was, to be very honest, we never had any money when I was growing up. And I had, a family of 5, and we lived very close to the poverty line. And because of the lack of money in my own home, I was inspired to learn how to make it, how to grow it, how to spend it, and, how to have fun with it. So when I went about my journey every day looking for ideas and information on how a young person could, make their money and spend their money, etc., I came up shy of having resources. And I decided post-university that it was about time someone addressed the market. And that's when the idea behind Rich by 30 was born. I had just taken my business degree, and I had a lot of momentum behind me. I had some very exciting experiences throughout university and before pertaining to financial literacy, and I decided to bundle up all of that information and create Rich by 30. Within a couple of weeks of Rich by 30 being launched, it did become a very popular book. It was on the bestseller list for many, many weeks, and it has sustained that momentum. And I think the reason it's sustained the momentum is because the book covers an area of the market that isn't necessarily being addressed. So like you mentioned, many students are not receiving financial literacy education, and heaven knows it's not necessarily the most popular dinner table conversation. So these same young people go home and their parents might not be talking about money. And if they are talking about money, they may not know exactly what they're talking about. So a lot of this younger generation is growing up financially illiterate. And sometimes, there's lots of speculation as to why it is we don't have financial literacy programming in schools. And I think sometimes it comes down to schools not having the training or the resources, or perhaps they have other priorities on their agenda. But the financial crisis of 2008 which has seeped into 2009 and probably will carry forward for quite some time, has certainly taught us that financial literacy actually is important. And our financial illiteracy has actually contributed quite a bit to the global economic crisis. Right now, there is a lot more attention being placed on financial literacy programming, and I wouldn't be surprised if in the next year to 5 years, more schools, I'd like to see them, and I hope they're on the track for this. I wouldn't be surprised if more schools were starting to implement homegrown financial literacy training. So it's something that I'm very passionate about, and I think that there are a lot of people that are giving this topic much more attention these days. For example, Barack Obama, he's all about taking responsibility for ourselves, for our families, for our finances, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the outcomes of his initiative would be financial training and financial literacy and a more heavy focus in that area.
Well, I sure hope you're right, because from what I hear from the Obama camp, he seems to be about government taking care of everybody, and it sounds like a great idea, but it just doesn't sound like it's really possible. So we'll kind of see how that turns out. But it's interesting, and we should give it a little context here. You're talking to us from Calgary, right?
From Calgary, Alberta.
Okay, Calgary, Alberta. And did you grow up in that area?
Yes, I did.
Just to give a little backdrop to your story, yeah.
Sure. I was born in Toronto and grew up there and then moved west with my family, and both of my parents went back to post-secondary education, so university for both of them, when I was younger, and that's why we had no money, is because both of my parents were in school full-time, and I guess that was when my interest in money really was sparked, because we just had none of it.
But they were believers in higher education, so that's really what sort of made them poor, at least temporarily, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, and I have to say that my parents, though we didn't have a lot of money, they really invested in our education, through library and literacy and that type of thing.
Good to hear. Well, let's talk about some of the specific techniques, and I want to bring this in, Lesley, to where it applies for young adults specifically, and of course that's what the conversation's all about. The differences between saving and investing. Explain what those are, if you would.
So the primary difference between saving and investing is when you save, it tends to be for the shorter term. And I like to think of saving as saving for things that you would like to have within 1 to 3 years. Things like vacations, computers, those types of things would fall into the savings category. And on the other side, investing is more for the longer term, so more than 3 to 5 years down the road. And we would invest for things like our retirement, perhaps we would invest in real estate or in rental properties or something of that nature. The second difference is saving tends to be, things that we save for tend to be more inexpensive than things that we invest for. And a natural comparison would be if you were saving for a vacation, that might be $2,000 versus if you were investing for your retirement, that might be $2 million. So because investing items tend to be a bit more expensive, we naturally would invest more of our time, energy, and dollars into the longer-term investments, and we would invest or save smaller amounts of money for our shorter-term savings.
So, Lesley, where does a house come in on that? If a young person wants to buy their first house or condo, whatever it is that something you save for or something you invest for? Because that's kind of in between the numbers you just mentioned.
Well, there's two different components. First-time home buyers tend to have to save for their down payment for a home, which tends to be between 3 and 5% of the value of the home. And longer term, they invest in that property by holding on to that property and by paying down the mortgage. So the actual home is more in line with the investment category, but the act of saving for a down payment falls into the savings category.
Why should a young person invest. I think one of the problems and challenges that young people face is that they sort of view life as that they've got forever. It's the act of denying current pleasures and instant gratification for a longer-term goal. And when you're 22 years old, you sort of feel like you have forever and everything will just kind of work out and be provided and you feel bulletproof. And that sort of changes as we age, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So your question really is, why on earth would a young person even consider investing?
Right. Why would they want to worry about that yet? Or live for today type attitude?
It's a huge question. And it often presents a barrier later in life by having that, oh, why would I bother attitude. So the primary reason we would want to start investing early on for our financial future is so that we have eventually the freedom to choose to do what we want to do. So from bird's eye view, the whole premise behind investing is you invest now so that sometime down the road, you perhaps might want to retire or you might want to pursue something else, and you'll have the money available to do that. So ultimately, it's about pursuing your dreams. Now, investing specifically for your retirement, that is very, very, very important because we are not going to have a lot of government support, and our pension programs through work are not going to be as adequate or robust as I think they have been in the past due to a lot of economic meltdown and changes to regulation and changes to our pension plans. So one thing to keep in mind is that if you don't invest, nobody is going to do it for you. So you'll be spooked later on in life if you don't take the initiative now. Now, the other reason a young person would want to start investing early on is because the earlier you start investing, the more opportunity you give this wonderful thing called compound interest to work its magic. And compound interest is where you earn interest on the principal amount that you invest. Then you start earning interest on the interest on the principal, and then you start earning interest on the interest on the interest on the principal. So it's kind of like a snowball effect. And the more time you give your money to grow interest on the interest and literally compound itself, the more money you will have saved. And being young has that one advantage in that you have more time on your side. So let's say a 16-year-old starts to invest $35 a month, and they do that through to their retirement. They will have over $1 million by the time that they retire, versus a 30-year-old who just starts to invest at age 30. They would have to save not $35 a month. They'd have to save about $350 a month to achieve almost the same result. So that's a very interesting comparison. It actually pays in spades for that 16-year-old to tuck away $35 a month or whatever it is for that person and do that continuously over the year and allow compound interest to work its magic on their money. And they end up saving a heck of a lot less than somebody at the age of 30 that saves that $350 a month or whatever it is until their retirement.
Yeah, Lesley, there's no question about the power of compound interest and the rule of 72s and all of that kind of thing. And when you see those charts and graphs that financial planners like to use all the time, it really is amazing how starting earlier, to your point, starting sooner, it makes such a difference. And that is why it is so vital that young people listen to this. However, I want to throw a monkey wrench into this thinking because
Sure.
I think this concern is really staring us in the face right now, like probably never before in the history of the United States, at least. And of course, you're Canadian, but we're very closely linked. Inflation. The government is printing money like it is going out of style right now. The new administration here in the U.S. is spending. And they have come out and said they're going to spend a lot more. And that means one thing, it means inflation. And the fear I have about that, which everything you say is absolutely right on target, but in an inflationary environment, it gets a little foggy as to whether that's really going to work the same way, right? What are your thoughts about that?
That is a very, very important point to bring up. There are two things that will be a hurdle no matter what when you look at investing money in traditional financial stocks or mutual funds or index funds. And one of them is inflation, the other is taxes. Both are inevitable factors.
Well, there's not a third thing in there? Here's what I'm getting at the third thing. It's quite in the news nowadays, especially with Bernie Madoff being sentenced yesterday to 150 years. But it's like nobody trusts Wall Street anymore. The corporate crookery, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And especially Generation Y, your generation they just got to think that you can't trust these crooks. It's just one scandal after another. But I don't want to derail the conversation with that necessarily, but talk about inflation and taxes, and maybe we'll get back to that if you want to.
All right. Well, to your point about inflation, it is always going to be a factor that we have to deal with. And on average, inflation has risen in North America at approximately 3% over the past century. And the time that we're in right now, we've identified a very, I guess you could say, a little bit of a frightening point. The governments in North America, Canada, and the U.S. are injecting a lot of money into the economy. And one of the byproducts of something like that is inflation. Now, I believe inflation is something that you should monitor, but I'm not sure that it should be the driving force behind whether or not you choose to invest in something right now, because we don't have any evidence to suggest yet that inflation is going to derail our plans completely. It's definitely something that needs to be monitored, and if inflation rates do start to skyrocket, then you're going to want to change your plans, whether it's your investment plans or your real estate plans. Another thing to keep in mind is that right now we have periods of very, very low interest rates, and we haven't seen the impact that inflation will potentially have in the future yet. So if you're considering interest rates and perhaps buying a home or leveraging to invest in something, you'll want to monitor those rates very closely, and you'll also want to consider locking into more fixed long-term rates, because we are very low right now, and those rates will increase, especially with money being injected back into the market. They're very low, and they will go up soon.
Right, yeah. And I think
who knows when?
You know what you're saying there, Lesley, I think is really the sort of platinum opportunity here is that people today can lock in on a 30-year, a 3-decade-long in the States, and Canada I think it's a little shorter, mortgage on a property. And if we have inflation, two things are going to happen. Number one, that debt is going to be repaid in cheaper dollars. And number two, the value of that house will increase in an inflationary environment. I mean, traditionally, real estate's been a great hedge against inflation, especially when you look at, and we talked a little bit before we started recording today about your experience working in the commodities industry. And houses are made of commodities, construction materials. And in an inflationary environment, historically, those have done very well. So I think there's kind of a two-edged opportunity there, if you will.
There is. And it's just something, there is, I think what we've learned from the economic crisis is that there are no set-in-stone rules anymore. And yes, history is a somewhat good predictor of what might happen in the future, but it is not set in stone by any stretch. So keep an eye on those inflation rates, keep an eye on those interest rates, and by all means, if you are equipped to invest and maintain that investment, and if you can leverage at lower interest rates, take advantage of those lower interest rates. We all like cheap money, and I'm a huge believer in taking advantage of those types of things.
I think the one caveat is what you said before. They must be fixed-rate mortgages. That's the key.
They must be. Yeah, they absolutely must be.
So don't go for the immediate gratification of a cheap adjustable rate loan that's not going to stay that way for very long. Long-term fixed rate mortgages. Talk about budgeting just for a moment, and then I want to get into the credit card traps, because I know that credit card companies have been marketing on college campuses and getting young people in trouble with debt. It's just a repeated story. But first, budgeting. Tell us a little bit about budgeting.
So budgeting tends to be the big, bad, boring tool that keeps people in line. And it's got a bad rap, and a lot of people just can't stand the thought of having to sacrifice or scale back their spending. So, though it has a bad rap, budgets are very useful. Budgets are also very important. Budgets allow you to identify where your income is coming from, and on the flip side, where it's going on the expense side. I always recommend to young people that, though they may not want to right now, draw up a budget. Draw up where your income is coming from, and then start tracking where it's going. And I'm talking about the expenses like your mortgage or your rent, your car loans, and your IRA contributions or whatever it might be. But also start tracking the smaller things within the budget. Those are things like meals out, to the movies, perhaps it's books or pens or whatever, or coffee. It's important to get a handle on where the big ticket expenditures are, but also the small ones, because what we'll find is once we start tracking and do it for at least 3 weeks, track everything, once we start tracking where our money goes, then we can go back and revisit where there are opportunities to either cut back or cut out some unnecessary things. Now, I want to put something on the table here. I love to create little spreadsheets to find out how much things are really costing. So I drew up a spreadsheet a little while ago to see how much buying your lunch every single day would actually cost you throughout your working career. So let's say you bought an $8 lunch every day from age 25 to 65. If you compound that $8 lunch at 8.5% or 9%, and you look back at the age of 65, you would have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, in excess of $500,000 on lunches, buying an $8 lunch 5 days a week. That doesn't seem like a very good use of cash, if you ask me. And so I just wanted to share that example to showcase the fact that sometimes the little things that we don't necessarily think are big budget killers, they end up being long-term huge budget killers. So I'm not suggesting that you cut back completely certain things that you enjoy in your life, but maybe pare down to 2 lunches a week and make the rest of your lunches at home, or maybe only buy 1 coffee a day versus 3 coffees a day. I think it's really important for young people to at least go through the motions of trying to track their income and expenditures, track those nitty-gritty little tiny expenditures, track everything for at least 3 weeks, and then go back and revisit areas where you can cut back or cut out. I am living proof that you can live a very, very frugal life and still enjoy your life. I own a home. I have a nice car. I do go out for dinner with my friends. I contribute regularly to a retirement plan. I have nice clothes. I have nice bags, etc. But I have different priorities. I budget, and I enjoy my life, but at the top of my budget, my first priority is to make sure that I save money for my future. So, some people have said, you've probably heard it before, pay yourself first. And it's very, very true. I always set aside a certain amount of money every single month that goes straight into my financial portfolio, so my, whether it's real estate or whether it's investments, and I tuck it away. And then the rest of the money that's left over in my bank account, I can do what I'd like to do with it. And I enjoy that. I enjoy having the freedom and flexibility to go for dinner when I want, to take a nice trip, afford to basically have the freedom to choose to do what I want to do.
Sure.
And
yeah.
it has to do with priority.
Good. What about credit card traps? Because this is an area where some of the late fees and interest rates, it's just punitive what these credit card companies are doing in many cases. Talk about avoiding those traps, if you would.
Sure. Credit cards are a killer. The average interest rate on a credit card is ranging between 18 and 22%. And the reason credit cards are so incredibly expensive, especially when you carry a balance, is because your interest rate is charged on a daily basis, not just a monthly or quarterly basis. So it ends up compounding quickly, and it's very uncomfortable, and a lot of people end up deep in financial trouble because they can't keep up with having to make the payment. So I want to put things in perspective. Many people have credit card balances. We have some research that suggests about 85% of North Americans are currently carrying a credit card balance on their credit cards because, let's face it, the economy is not that good, and a lot of people are left having to pay for things on credit just to stay afloat. So that's fine. But going into unnecessary credit card debt is absolutely financially lethal right now. It's not a good idea. So I do have some suggestions for young people to deal with credit cards. So I also want to put in perspective that from the moment we are in high school or our later years of school, we start getting messages to suggest that we should sign up for a credit card as soon as possible and start spending on this credit card. So we now, these days, have so much available credit, it's not even funny. I read an article not that long ago where a credit card company had actually got the name of somebody's dog. They didn't even know that it was a dog, and they sent a credit card application to the dog that lived in a household of an owner.
My dog has a credit card too, but I have to really keep him under control with it because he likes to buy all kinds of crazy stuff with that card.
It's very, very absurd, some of the things that are going on. So basically, young people are getting asked to sign up for credit cards. Credit is readily available, and everybody, including dogs now, apparently are being given credit cards, which is absolutely ridiculous. Now, a lot of people get into unhealthy spending habits, and so they end up, the average household is between $4,000 and $8,000 in credit card debt, and they're carrying a balance. Here are some things that you can do. So first off, if you are prone to temptation, make sure that you are removed from the mailing list and the call list of credit card companies. You can do that. Go onto the internet, find out what do not call lists are available in your area, and make sure that you add your name so that they're not calling your house, so that you're not tempted on a daily basis to sign up for those cards. Second thing that you can do is have only one or two credit cards. All of the rest of them you really, really don't need. So just keep in mind one or two credit cards and make sure that you are maintaining the balance on those cards. Next thing that you can do is get the cards out of your sight. So if you have a balance and you are very, very tempted to spend, throw that credit card in a Ziploc bag and fill it with water and put it in your freezer. Or bury it literally in the backyard.
I love that. Make an ice cube out of your credit card. That's hilarious.
Anything. Just get it out of your sight. And I promise, out of sight, out of mind, it does work. Next thing that you should do is, no matter whether you owe a balance or not, you should phone your credit card company and you should negotiate the interest rate on your credit card. Many people don't know that you can do this, but within 10 minutes of phoning your credit card company, you can often negotiate your interest rate down between 8 and 10 percentage points. That's huge. So let's say you owe $8,000 on your credit card. You'd be paying hundreds and hundreds of dollars in interest every month, and you might be able to save a couple $100 of interest charges and have that applied to the principal. All you need to do is phone into your credit card company, ask for a lower rate. If they don't give you one, present a competitive offer. There's tons of them on the internet, or ask them to switch you to a new product where they have a lower rate. If you're not getting anywhere, speak to a manager, and if you're still not getting anywhere, you can threaten to move your business, and oftentimes they will want to retain your business, and they're going to cooperate with you. 90% of the time, just having a 10-minute phone call with your credit card company will result in a huge reduction in your credit card rate. If not, try and switch to a low-interest rate credit card.
Anything else on the credit cards?
Yeah, a couple more things. If you are really, really deep in debt, change the frequency of your payment. And what I mean by that is if you pay once per month a certain amount of money, let's say $100 on your credit card, switch that once per month payment to twice per month. So do $50 at the beginning of the month and $50 in the middle of the month. And what that does is it actually hits the principal amount on that credit card twice per month versus once per month. And because compound interest is compounded daily.
You don't have it for the other half. Yeah, that's good.
That's right. It starts reducing that rate reducing the amount of money much quicker. So just some simple things that you can do to reduce that rate.
Okay, good. Good stuff.
That's it.
Okay, great.
For my credit card.
So that's the credit card stuff. I want to take two more chunks here in the limited time we have. Choosing the right investment vehicles for a person's investment style. Some people have a high risk tolerance. Some people have a low risk tolerance. Some people are looking for appreciating investments. Some people are looking for cash flowing and income-oriented investments, dividend-paying stocks, etc. What do you think about the right vehicle for the right person?
Well, it's very important to be properly allocated. And what I mean by that is, as an investor, if your investment profile, so your personality, is misaligned with the type of investment that you've purchased, you have a tendency to hop around or get out of the investments that you're currently in, versus an investor that's properly allocated, so the investments that they've chosen is congruent with the personality that they have, they tend to stay invested more for the long term. Now, I'm going to put some numbers to this. Those who are not properly allocated, so, for example, conservative investor that has purchased a junk bond, which is a high-risk bond, those investors that are not properly allocated tend only to make about 4% on their portfolios in the long term because they hop around, versus an investor that's properly allocated. So, for example, a conservative investor would be properly allocated, let's say, in a money market fund, which is a low-risk money market mutual fund. They tend to be invested more for the long term, and because they don't hop around, they tend to make anywhere between 10 and 12% on their portfolio. So these are both long-term perspectives, but it does give you an idea of how beneficial it is to get properly allocated within the types of investments that suit your personality, and then once you're properly allocated, hang on to those investments. And that's kind of it is called the buy and hold strategy. It's a Warren Buffett strategy that has produced excellent returns in the long run.
Do you think the buy and hold strategy is still valid, though, in today's environment? Of course, we're looking at this from the perspective of how so many investors just got completely burned in Wall Street-related products over the last year and a half or so, or really couple of years. And when you look at, you can chop this up a million different ways, but when you look at back decades ago, if someone bought the Dow or bought the S&P, and you look at decades later, it's like, adjusted for inflation, there's been no real gain in terms of appreciation. It's really just been dividends. That's all people have really achieved in the stock market. And then, of course, then you have to believe that the official, I'll say that in quotes, the quote, official, unquote, inflation rates are accurate, which in the U.S., we think they're kind of understated by about 3%. I think most people agree on that. Just a thought there I wanted to mention.
To your point, the benchmarks have actually appreciated throughout the past century at between 10 and 12%. So if you were to buy in and hold that throughout the long term, then you would have seen that growth and appreciation. yes, inflation has eroded some of the returns, and as you mentioned, the inflation numbers may or may not be accurate, but all we have right now is what we know.
Right.
So I definitely don't want to deter people from investing, because right now, especially for the young people who are the audience of this tape, they have an opportunity, especially if they haven't started to invest in not only financial markets, but also in real estate markets at exceptionally lower prices. So financially speaking, a stock now is worth, it's actually priced at perhaps 30 to 40% less than it was a year ago. On the real estate side of things, a home now can be priced a lot lower, maybe 30, 40, 50, 60% less.
Depending on where it's located, of course, yeah.
Depending on where it's located, depending on a variety of circumstances, as with the financial market. So I want to, send a message out to young people that, yes, we've seen some pretty scary things that have happened over the past 12 months. However, young people have this incredible, unprecedented opportunity right now to take their hard-earned money and invest it for the long term in assets that are significantly undervalued. And yes, I do appreciate that it'll probably be 2 or 3 years before the market fully recovers, maybe even longer, who knows. But for a long-term perspective, for a young person that has the time, I would really, really encourage them to start investing, whether it's in financial markets, or I think they should be investing in the financial markets, but I also think buy that home soon. Fix that interest rate at a low price, and make sure that you're spending your money on assets, things that grow. Stop spending your money on liabilities or things that literally do not hold their value.
That's absolutely good advice there, no question about it. Okay, how about simple organizational techniques in terms of getting motivated, organized, saving, budgeting? You talked about budgeting, obviously, avoiding the credit crunch. What do young people need to know about these things?
There are a variety of competing interests for a young person that's starting out for their financial resources. And I have to say, it only gets worse as time passes. There are going to be more priorities and more life changes that will occupy your time, talent, and your treasure. But there are some things that we can implement in our lives that do make our lives a lot easier. As you mentioned, budget. They do have a bad rap, but they do pay off in spades. If you have the ability to track your income and expenditures, then you'll be able to find opportunities to cut back and cut out. You'll also be able to better plan for your future. So, for example, if you know something is going to cost you $1,000 in a year from now, you have an opportunity through budgeting to prepare yourself to save in advance for the things that you want. So implementing a budget in your personal financial situation is absolutely key. I think it's really, really important. Second thing, from an organizational perspective, I do believe it's very important for young people to start contributing financially to their 401k or their IRA plan. And many young people have opportunities to invest in plans not only through the financial institutions that are locally based or wherever you deal, but they also have an opportunity to invest in these financial plans through their employer. And I recently discovered that approximately 1 in 4 North Americans was contributing to their company-sponsored investment plan. And I thought that that was supremely low and quite shocking, because most employers have a matching program for what you contribute to the plan. So let's say I would contribute 2%, and my employer might contribute another 2% and match my contribution. So to be organized, make sure that you are signed up for your company-sponsored 401k or IRA plan, and have them match your contribution. There's nothing better than free money. It's free and it's an instant return, and I would hate to see the listeners on this podcast not signed up for those plans when they have them available. Next thing I can recommend, to be organized. I have often found over the years it is very helpful if, for example, I am saving for something, or if I'm investing, or if I'm paying a mortgage, to have the money that I'd like to save, invest, or pay automatically taken out of my checking account the day that I get paid. And the reason I suggest having things automatically transferred is because it reduces your temptation to spend. So, for example, if you get paid $1,000 and the day you get paid, $50 of that $1,000 goes directly into your 401k plan, you have no temptation to spend that $50. It's automatically transferred, and what you have left to spend is that $950 in the account. So automating the contributions to your financial plans, to your, if you're paying a mortgage, to your mortgage, these are very helpful, simple things that you can set up, which will help keep you organized, but also it will just remove the temptation to spend that money. And, you really don't want to have your financial retirement derailed due to, a couple movies and dinner because you just didn't, or you forgot to transfer the funds into your 401k plan. And then on the debt perspective, for organizational purposes, I've mentioned it before, I would recommend that you have your debt payments automatically transferred from your checking account to those debts on the day that you get paid. I would also recommend that young people go through the exercise of negotiating the interest rates that they have on things like credit cards, car loans, and other long-term borrowing instruments. The reason I suggest you consider negotiating the rates on those types of things is because right now the rates are so low. You might be able to get yourself renegotiate the rates. You might be able to get a consolidation loan if you're very heavily in debt. You might be able to secure a line of credit at a much lower rate than you would have been able to secure it at a year ago. And that can be very, very helpful. On the home ownership side of things, I do recommend that young people seriously consider becoming personally a homeowner. And the reason I suggest that is because being a homeowner, you end up forcing yourself to save in so many ways because you force yourself to pay a mortgage. But I also just want to share that homeowners tend to be between 40 and 60 times wealthier than renters. And that's a huge incentive to own a home. And if you like real estate, now is a really great time to look at rental properties for the future. So the real estate market changes, and so does the rental market. If you like real estate and you're comfortable with it, building a real estate portfolio has also proven to be a very profitable long-term investment strategy. So all in all, those are some of my organizational tips and tricks and information.
Excellent. Well, Lesley, thank you so much for your pearls of wisdom today. And the book is Rich by 30. The website is richby30.com. And there you have a newsletter people can subscribe to and a blog, and they can look at some resources and all kinds of great stuff. And keep up the good work. This is really important education for young people to have, and it is sorely lacking in today's world. So we're glad you're out there spreading the good word.
Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Lesley. Good talking to you.
Copyright the Hartman Media Company. For publication rights and interviews, please email media@jasonhartman.com. This show offers very general information concerning real estate for investment purposes. Opinions of guests are their own. Jason Hartman is acting as president of Platinum Properties Investor Network exclusively. Nothing contained herein should be considered personalized, personal, financial, investment, legal, or tax advice.
Every investor's strategy and goals are unique. You should consult with a licensed real estate broker or agent or other licensed investment, tax, and/or legal advisor before relying on any information contained herein. Information is not guaranteed. Please call 714-820-4200 and visit www.jasonhartman.com for additional disclaimers, disclosures, and questions.